301-230-0980 is the Team 980 listener line. What is your reaction to the Emmanuel Forbes news? Let's go to Kenny in Largo. Kenny, thanks for calling. You're on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, what's going on, fellas? How you doing?
Doing well, Kenny. What you
got? That's good. So I hope I hope you understand my thought on this one, okay? So my thought on this one is, well, my first question is, why was he at corner to begin with? Meaning, was he there because they wanted to see what they had in him, or was he there because they had no one better? If he was out there because we had no one better, then I'm worried, because that means whoever comes up after him is going to be in trouble. But if he was out there because they wanted to see what we had, maybe the person that comes in after him, whoever that may be, could be better, and we could have a better defense, or at least a better corner on that side. So that's my thought process on Emmanuel Forbes. What y'all think?
Yeah, Kenny, I think it's a good question, and I think the answer is kind of both. I've talked about this quite a bit throughout the offseason, but their roster needed so much work that there was only so much that they could do at one time. And trying to get top flight players is just, it's hard, right? Most of them come through the draft. There's only so many top draft picks that you have. Obviously, their first round pick, they needed to use on a quarterback. They went in other positions early. Although, I mean, Mike Sanders still is a second rounder. So like it's not like that they didn't address that position. They just went inside at nickel instead of outside at outside corner. And I think that they made some calculated risks. They were like, for some of these guys, for a guy like Forbes who was drafted last year, and Peter certainly had thoughts on him, right? He would have scouted him last year when he was in San Francisco, and maybe he wouldn't have taken him when Ron did, and certainly not over a guy like Christian Gonzalez, I don't think, based off of how Peter's, like the things that Peter seems to value versus the things the previous administration did. You have to take some risks there, and you have to say, like, well, we have these players under contract. We don't really have a great way to get other ones. Let's see if we can coach them up and get better out. And so, I again, like, this is why I'm kind of, for the clarity of the argument here, I'm glad they traded Jahan Dotson, right? They took their last two first-round picks, and they gave them opportunities as starters, as top guys, and ultimately, by the end of camp, Forbes had earned his starting job. If Noah Igbenogany had been better in training camp, they wouldn't have started Emmanuel Forbes just because he's a first-round pick. They would have started one of the guys who beat him out. Or Jahan Dotson did not beat out guys like De'Ami Brown or Luke McCaffrey or whoever, and they didn't like the way he was coming to work every day. So they were like, you want to know what? If you don't want to be here, like, we can send you somewhere else. Forbes fought to be here. He played well enough to earn his spot, and then he had a bad game. And guys have bad games, and I very much would expect that they're better this weekend without him, because I think they would have been better with him. And that's the hard part of the evaluation piece of this is, okay, you can't play we're not in a global simulator here. You can't play the New York game once with Forbes and once without him. You just have to do your best guess on what would have happened with him, or with him, since they're going to play without him. And so I hope that, like, in a way answers your question, in that there's a very good chance that there's someone who could prove it this weekend that they're better for right now. Certainly that they played better than he did last week, but also he did earn that spot coming out of camp. And that's because it's really hard to acquire really good players all in one offseason, and they chose to take risks in certain places versus others, and corner was a place with the talent that they had in Forbes, the talent that they had in St. Juice. They were willing to coach it up, take that risk, and they're going to live with the results, and if the results are bad, they'll address it next offseason.
Sounds good.
All right, Kenny, appreciate the call. 301-230-0980 is the Team 980 listener line. Your thoughts or questions on the Emmanuel Forbes injury. Let's go to Gary in Upper Marlboro. Gary, thanks for calling. You're on the Hoffman Show.
Thanks for having me. I think my take on this is it depends on how long he's out, okay? If he's out, 8 to 10 weeks with this, I think it's a real blow to the franchise, because you wanted to see, I think this was going to get a sample size of him as to whether or not he was the future at the cornerback position. And I think you alluded to this, that, hey, if he's not the guy, then maybe we need to address this in the draft next year. And if it's an 8 to 10 week injury or something that takes him out the full year, they won't be able to make that evaluation, and they may be forced to make a move when maybe they don't need to make a move. If he was on the field and he proved he could be the number one guy. If it's a 4 to 6 week injury and he still has 10 games to play, I think that's enough of a sample size for them to make that determination. But it's hard for a young player to lose time. I think, like you said, he played in training camp well. He earned the starting position, and you just hope mentally it doesn't take him somewhere that he doesn't need to go. But I agree with you. I think they're going to play better next week, whether he was in there or not. But I just hope the young man keeps his head up and, does his rehab and comes back stronger than ever. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks, Gary. Thanks for the call. I mean, I think Gary's point, though, unlocks the next path or the next pathway of discussion here for Emmanuel Forbes, which is how he handles this rehab is now his test. They are watching how you do everything, and especially for a guy that's had some questions at times about his work ethic and about how he comes to work, his willingness to be disciplined, and that's on the field, right? We talked about it earlier in the week. Dan Quinn talking about how when he went to BSJ after he gave up the first touchdown to Evans, he's like, "Hey man, what happened?" Benjamin was like, I was there. I turned the wrong way. I know what I got to do." And Dan's like, "Great, let's fix it." Like, that doesn't mean that Benjamin can just say all the time, "Hey, man, I know what to do." It's like, eventually you got to do it. But in week one, playing some new techniques, playing in a new scheme, playing against Mike Evans, okay, fine. Hey, you know immediately what you got to do. You got to have the recognition next time to do it. And then he was like, when you go to a guy and he says, I don't know what I was supposed to do, that's a lot harder to work with, and that's not going to fly in the long term if a guy just constantly doesn't know what to do. And if you read between the lines, like, he was talking about Emmanuel Forbes. And so I think that now with that, with this different test, right? A different test to show the discipline, the professionalism, how you attack a rehab, how you focus or not in meetings, assuming that he's still going to be a part of them. Because sometimes when you're rehabbing an injury, you wind up doing some of the physical work in the meetings. Like, you don't need to be in a game plan meeting for a game you're not playing. But they also, if I'm DQ and I'm Joe Witt and I'm Adam Peters coming down from on high being like, "Hey, guys, we need to figure out and make sure he's in these meetings because I want to know how he conducts himself in the meetings." Like, do you stay locked in? Are you there to help your teammates? Are you contributing, doing whatever you can? Or are you just moping or doing the bare minimum? Are you in the building to do your rehab and immediately going home, not hanging out with your teammates, not being a part of the team, not being a part of the culture that they want to set here? And so this does become an enormous test for Emmanuel Forbes. And I'm not saying it's a bigger test than it would be on the field. That would be incredible, or than if he was on the field. That would be incredibly hyperbolic. But for a lot of the stuff on a baseline level, before you even hit the field, a lot of the stuff that they've got questions, and thus we've got questions about Emmanuel Forbes on, he can prove a lot in this period. And so this is a huge, typically it's 6 to 8 weeks is the number I've seen floated around in a couple of different places for recovery from this. So assuming he gets the surgery quickly, we're talking 6 to 8 weeks. He'll be back, let's see, it's early November to late November, depending on what the timeline is for him. So this is an enormously important stretch for Emmanuel Forbes' professional career. Not to mention, like, how you attack rehab determines how successful the rehab is. So if he doesn't do the work that he needs to do, like, his thumb and wrist are not going to be right, which is kind of important for someone who wants to catch footballs for a living. So there's that element as well. But I just think how he comes to work every day with a good attitude, with a professional approach, with an idea of, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make this team better, even though I can't be on the field right now. If he does that stuff, his leash gets a lot longer without him even having to play. Eventually, he's going to have to do it on the field, but his leash can get longer, or it could get shorter based off how he attacks this rehab and the yeoman's approach that Dan Quinn expects and Adam Peters expect of players in their organization as they try to build this thing from the ground up. 301-230-0980 is the phone number, 301-230-0980. More of your calls on the breaking news that Emmanuel Forbes is going to be out for a little bit with wrist surgery next on The Hoffman Show.
This is The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.